The ultimate, the foundation, the future of all your flower arrangements is within this presentation. The vast and exclusive photo library of Floral Design magazine has been opened to give you the 32 essential flower arranging styles. Once you have these, the infinite varieties will keep your designs up to date, on trend and exciting. The symmetrical style is the most common one you will see, and you probably know it well. The whole essence of it is whatever you do on one side, you copy exactly on the other. It doesn't even really matter what you put on one side, because the mere fact that you're copying it gives your design perfect balance. So this can be done with any plant material in any way, as long as it is a reflection from one side to the other. Within all these styles there are grades, perfectly symmetrical to being almost symmetrical to being a hint of symmetrical. This has to happen. You're working with plant material, and plant material is not going to give a precise mirror image. A symmetrical design is very ordered. It is very formal. It doesn't have very much movement or excitement, yet it is extremely pleasing to look at, because as human beings we love patterns, and a symmetrical line will always give you that. This is a design that hasn't been finished, but it can show you how there's one gladioli on one side, one on the other, one piece of conifer, one on the other. And finally, a symmetrical form that is less symmetrical than the others. Have a close look and you'll see the flowers don't match, proving that symmetry is an idea, it is not a rule. The less a design is symmetrical, the more it becomes asymmetrical, because asymmetrical is the opposite of symmetrical. In these designs you can see that they have quite a bit of symmetry, as one side visually is balanced the same as the other, but the placements of the flowers on either side are different. A totally asymmetrical design will have absolutely nothing that is the same anywhere on it, left side, right side, front or back. These are extremely rare and not particularly pleasing. So once again we have grades of an asymmetrical look. Because an asymmetrical design still needs to look balanced, often it is used in floral design as having more of something on one side and less on the other, and the side that's got less on it would have a stronger colour. Have a look at these examples and you'll see how these designers have made them different and not completely mirrored, but there's still articles, elements from one that's reflected in the other side, also in the front and the back. So these are your first two style choices. Are you going to make your design symmetrical, or are you going to make your design asymmetrical? When creating a design and not copying a design, that is always your first design choice. From that you choose your plant materials, your structure, and all the other things that are so important in creative designing. And now another consideration. Is your design going to be formal linear, or is it going to be vegetative, or is it going to be decorative? A decorative design, dare I say it, decorates. It is all about the shape of the decoration. It is not about the individual flowers. The individual flowers can often be lost because they're just part of lots of flowers that are there to give great statement, a great floral statement. They are pushed together, they are grouped together, they're part of a bigger whole, but they don't stand out on their own. A decorative flower arrangement has many different types of flowers, chosen because they have the same form or they have the same colour or even they have the same scale, but they certainly aren't placed to be noticed on their own. Decorative style flower arranging can be any shape, any size, on anything, but expect to see a massive flowers created on a shape of some sort. Very popular European designing technique. Decorative flower arranging is always pretty and everybody always loves them. The vegetative design. It's one of my favourites, and surprisingly, when I present it to my business customers, they love it too. You arrange the flowers as if they are exactly the same way as done by nature. That means you can say, I want a shores environment, a heather environment, a marsh environment, alpine or wildflower. I love the wildflower. Everything is arranged by putting it as the flowers grow in the environment where you would pick them if they grew there. It seems so easy, and it is easy, just remembering to keep it space between it. Add the base. If it's desert, you're going to add sand and stones. If it's alpine, you're going to add mosses or wood. And imagine yourself looking inside this special place, and all around you are the plants growing as they did in nature. It's a stunning way of designing. It is a fantastic style, and it's really well worth trying. And the third in these three optional styles is the formal linear style. It focuses on the silhouette of the arrangement, the silhouette which is made up of the lines, the flowers, the leaves, the branches. And when they all come together, it forms this beautiful whole. The easiest way to do it is to pick at the very beginning very bold plant forms, so their silhouette is always going to stand out. What a difference from the decorative style where they are all pushed in together. In the formal linear style, the flowers stand out on their own, the foliage stands out on its own. It is all about the silhouette. It is a very stable type of design, and it is always spectacular in the way it stands out. Think bold, think outline, think every flower in its place and be able to be seen. And definitely you can manipulate leaves, you can plait, you can weave, you can wrap, you can do anything. This is formal linear. Extremely popular in New Zealand. In fact, probably 20 years ago, it was the only style that we had. Bold, formal linear. So by now you've decided, is it going to be symmetrical or asymmetrical? Are you going to do it as a formal linear design, decorative or vegetative? And then we come to line arrangements. The styles are radial, parallel, diagonal, winding, overlapping and freely arranged. Possibly the most popular way of arranging a radial design comes from the center, from one point of growth. Everything goes from that point. All the lines lead out from the center or the side, or alternatively, all the lines lead back into the middle of the design. The plant material can be bold, it can be tizzy, it can be manipulated, but it's always coming towards that same centre point. This is a radial design. The next line style is the parallel arrangement of lines. If you had everything absolutely parallel, it would be very, very staid, very static. Therefore, a parallel often has a lean on it some way or the other, just to give it a wee bit more spontaneity, a bit more rhythm, a little bit more dramatic. Therefore, vegetative designs definitely are easy to do with parallel line arrangements, because the mere nature of having lots and lots of different plants and stems together, if they're parallel, adds unity, yet there's still excitement because you've got all of those differences. It doesn't all have to be in one straight line of parallelity. It can be groups of parallel. Once again, here we go back to grades of these line arrangements of all of these styles. You can have part of it parallel, part of it not parallel. There's huge amounts of possibilities when you think of the widths, the depths, and they're very exciting arrangements that often lend themselves to designs that look like little gardens or little landscapes. They're very, very popular, and they are used very much in European design in all sorts of wonderful ways with all sorts of wonderful plant material. When the line material winds up or winds down or spirals up and down or round and round, it is a winding line arrangement. You see this most often as some sort of a wreath or a ring, but it can also be canes spiraling upwards, spiraling downwards. Everything that is put within it is taking part of adding to that spiral. It is incredibly popular for big statements, and you can also use it as a decorative winding line arrangement, as this one is, where the plant material, once the line has been established, decorates it. You can also do it inside the container. Colours are fabulous for enhancing the line of a winding line arrangement. So these can look quite similar because, believe it or not, in 15 years our Floral Design magazine have never featured a winding line arrangement that spirals up or down. You can see all of these examples. They are quite flat and going horizontally. But to be really creative with this style, spiral up, spiral down, don't leave it flat. And how about the diagonal line arrangement? This one is really exciting because it creates an enormous amount of tension as the line goes from one side to the other, swooping upwards as it goes. Believe it or not, you can have a diagonal line arrangement that is always decorative, as this one inside the palm spathe that is creating the diagonal line by the way it is mounted. The diagonal line is also fantastic if you use it with parallels for wind It gives you the most beautiful feeling of tension and rushing past, bent by the wind. Fabulous idea. Try a diagonal. Overlapping style. Here's one for you if you want lots and lots of tension. You have one set of lines overlapping to crisscross the other set of lines. It is fabulous for an asymmetrical design, and it creates so much tension. You can have it as a single line, or you can have it as a group of lines. As they come down, they bounce from one to the other as they are crossing. For table decorations, they're wonderful because you can do them as a low height, but you can still have them crossing each other, which creates excitement and interest. So it's called overlapping. It can be immensely interesting, and it really is very, very different. And just like all the other ones, there are grades of overlapping. You can have just a small amount of overlapping or a large amount, but either way is going to give you a unique design that is going to be very, very different from the bog standard. When lines don't have to go all in the same direction, you have a free line arrangement. And the only form I've found of this is by the master himself, Gregor Lersch, who actually created all of these style ideas that we're exploring in this DVD. That was his creative line arrangement. The lines are shooting off in all directions, and all your other design elements and principles have to come into play to make it work. And so I have included in this section these arrangements that aren't free line arrangements in its purest form, but graduating towards being at the bottom end of the examples. They've still got line movement in some way, but it's much freer, and pieces of plant material are still shooting off in all directions or swirling away and up and out. But it does give you the idea that if you do have a free line arrangement, you have got the lines going in all sorts of directions, but remember, you still have to make a composition where you've thought about things like the proportion, the type of arrangement you're going to do, and all those other things that we're exploring here. In this section, we're looking at where you're going to put the main part of your arrangement, the centre of growth. And it's always been in the past in the container. But let's have a look and see what happens if we say, let's put the centre of growth above the container. Suddenly we have all these exciting possibilities where the container is simply there to help raise a fabulous interlaced work such as this one right up high into the sky, or the container is only there to have this fabulous bundle of floral work, and in this case eggs and birds, above it. You connect them up. It doesn't sitting in it, it's sitting on top of a sphere. All these things are really, really exciting when you think about putting things above the container, where the main focus is above the container, where it's way up high, so people can either be sitting at a table and looking underneath it or standing up and looking down at it. These are fabulous ideas. Think above the container. When the centre of growth or focal point is below the container, all sorts of beautiful ideas can cascade downward, but it's not just about cascading. Often it's about taking the line from the top and bringing it down so it meets underneath the container. The variables, when you start to think about this sort of designing, are enormous. Yes, you can put them on a mantelpiece and have them floating down, but it also works if you are starting from a high point and then things are floating down below them. The centre of growth or the focal point below the container gives you a lot of design freedom to think outside the square. And think about what would happen if you didn't have most of your plant material, your focal point, your centre of growth in the container at all, but on the outside, beside it. This is an amazingly interesting style that has to be seen to be believed because it's so unusual, but having it outside the container, beside the container, we see quite often, if you think about it, this wreath. There it is, the container, if you call it the wreath itself, the decoration is going down on the side. On this one, it floats along the table beside the container, if we call that middle piece the container. Beside the container in the 20, 30 years ago was an absolute no-no, but now it does open some exciting ideas if you want to have something shooting out of container and going off to the left or the right, often horizontally. You do have to have great mechanics though, so it will all stand up. then of course we have in the container, where the focal point, the centre of growth, is in the container, right on the rim, or actually inside it. This is the most popular style of design that you've probably been doing for years and years and years. It is where perhaps everybody starts. They say, oh yes, we'll grab some floral foam and we will put the flowers in, and we'll put the biggest one near the rim. But think about it. These photos are going to show you how many different ways you can still find to put the focal point in the container that's very different than perhaps what you're already doing. Most arrangements up till 15-20 years ago had one area that you looked at first. It was where everything originated from. It was the focal point. It was the place that you looked at. This type of arrangement is still unbelievably popular, and there it is, that great big pink flower in the middle. That lily is where the growth starts. It was always the biggest flower, and in the symmetrical example, slap bang in the middle. And so we can have just one of these in arrangement, one place where everything is placed for you to look at it first. From this one point, everything else irradiates or flings off or disappears with a line arrangement in another direction. But there it is, you can see it there. You decide, I'm going to have one centre of growth, and everything else is subordinate to that particular place in your arrangement. In these examples that you've already seen, see if you can find for yourself that focal point, that centre of growth, the place where everything else comes from. Because now you're going to be able to say, this design is a diagonal, or it is going downwards, or it is a line arrangement, and it also has one centre of growth. Can you see how we're starting to now to build up a vocabulary, as the styles are not just about one thing, but they may be about 3 or 4 different ideas that you put together as a designer. happens if you say, I want several or two centres of growth, focal points. I want to really start to mix things up now and perhaps make it symmetrical, but maybe more so asymmetrical, and have several areas where the plant material seems to be emerging from. What will happen then? Well, what will happen is you're going to get a lot more excitement in your design. You're going to have all sorts of interesting combinations starting to arrive, and formal linear designs, which you now know what they are, with several focal points, will probably be the hardest one you can try, but give it a go. Just see what it will look like if you put together an arrangement that has got two or more places where I wants to look first, where it seems to emerge from. This is what other people have done. You've seen these examples before, but this time you are looking to see how the plant material is emerging from two or several places. It is something that you can do whether you're doing decorative designs, vegetative designs, or formal linear designs, whether they're asymmetrical or symmetrical. You can still decide, do I want it from two areas of growth, so two centres, or do I want it from several? And this will completely change how your style, how your arrangement will look. And then there is this style. 20 years ago, the most controversial style, because it has absolutely no centres of growth or focal points. Or you could say every single plant placement is an area of growth or a focal point. 20 years ago, it was controversial because we were taught that we must have one area that everybody looked at first. In these designs, it does not exist. You put all of the plant material as if it's growing on its own from its own root system underneath the ground. It's very exciting because from this, of course, you get many decorative style designs. It's very freeing, but you still have to have the design elements and principles to make it work. To fully utilise this idea, abandon floral foam, which does force you to start the flowers all off from the same little place where you've placed the block. In this, use flower tubes. Glass flower tubes, plastic flower tubes covered in something will give you the ability to position your plant material wherever you want it on a structure of some sort. It is extremely freeing, it's extremely beautiful, and you really can have fun with this one. And now we're on to proportions. Where is most of your arrangement going to be in regards to the container you're using or the starting point you're using? So the first proportion we're going to look at is the proportions where everything is directed upwards. This is classic in floral works, and you can use it with either symmetrical or asymmetrical work, and the upright proportion creates tension sweeping upwards from that base point. It can be grand, it can be static, it completely depends on what other choices you make through these styles, because proportions directed upwards can still be, here they go again, decorative, formal linear, or vegetative. As you create this style, as you position your pieces of plant materials and accessories, just think, I'm going up. Everything I'm placing is accentuating this going upwardness of this style. Yes, you can have things where your eye stops like these round baubles, but as long as you position everything up and don't go sideways, you're going to have that wonderful tension, that wonderful sweeping beauty that is proportions directed upwards. With proportions being directed downwards, you may say, but isn't this the same as having the arrangement under the container? Because sometimes it looks like that, but there is a big difference. You can have your arrangement under a container, but it can be going out horizontally. But if you have your proportions directed downwards, that means that the arrangement is falling. It is coming down like a waterfall, like a crescent. The proportion of the arrangement is going down, and yet it doesn't have to be below a container. It can be coming down from the roof, it can be coming down from a wall, it can be suspended in some way from a column. So there is a difference between an arrangement under a container and a proportion that is directed downwards. All these have proportions that are directed downwards. The plant material is leading your eye downwards. To do it just exactly like with your upwards one, as you position your plant material, put it all so it is helping with that downward movement. Doesn't matter where you start from. Here's one above the container, but proportions downwards. You see these ones quite often. direct a proportion diagonally, it is quite a difficult thing to do. But it is different from a diagonal design, because a diagonal design has everything on the diagonal, as you've seen already in the style. This is proportioned diagonally, so most of it is on a diagonal. It is a stunning example here from Europe of it happening so it becomes very wind blown. It has a lot of tension as it's forcing you to lean sideways. Every placement is on that diagonal. Compare it with the section on diagonal work, and you'll see that in that case you can even use decorative design as the spade, and it's more static. But when it's proportionally directed diagonally, it swishes along and you're in the middle of a great big storm. There's another example here using formal linear style, much more static, but as everything is still being placed on that diagonal and pointing, in this case, diagonally downwards above the container. Are you starting to get the idea? So let's have a look at what directed horizontal proportions mean. It means that most of what is happening in the arrangement is going off in a direction horizontally, left or right. It creates lots of wonderful movement and tension because you are wishing something off into the left of the design or wishing something off to the right of the design. It's very different from a horizontal design. Have a look at this one. Everything is horizontal, but nothing is going horizontal. We have a static, formal, symmetrical, horizontal design, but it is not having its proportions directed horizontally. It is not swishing off left or right. There's not a lot of movement. So once again, have a look at one that is directed horizontally. There it is. Beautiful movement. Everything whizzing off into the right of the container. It is in the container, above the container perhaps even, and it is whizzing you off horizontally. And then we have proportions that are symmetrical. This means that as the design is being made, the width, the depth, the height is expanding identically because it is symmetric. It evolves evenly. So this is extreme example of one, and here is a more open. It is becoming still symmetrical, going outwards all at the same time, but graded perhaps not quite as symmetrically proportioned as the first one we saw. Another one that is perfectly symmetrically proportioned is these candlesticks. The beautiful layered leaves there have a fabulous pattern, and everything is exactly matching, symmetrically proportioned, very tight. Doesn't have to be this tight. As long as you keep the width, the depth, and the height all the same, you're going to have that proportion. Pretty hard to do, and you won't want to do it often. You will want to expand out and say, well, I'm going to have a little bit of that. I'm going to remember that I want it symmetrical sort of, but then those degrees again, make sure that if you do have a play with it, some of it still has the height, the depth, and the width. The final group of design styles invented by Gregor Lersch is called structural designing, and that's what we're going to explore in this last group. The first one is structures. And so normally when you're looking at an arrangement, all the flowers are gushing out at you and you go, oh, aren't they stunning, those flowers? I can see them so easily. But a structured bouquet wants you to look inward into the bouquet, or the structure that has been built for the flowers to be inside. What's wonderful about this idea is that you have layers upon layers upon layers of flowers within the structure that you have built, like these bouquets, so that you are discovering things, first the top and then you're looking down inside and down inside. The key to remember though is the flowers themselves need to be whole and full. What do I mean by that? I mean that you don't squash them all down, you give them all space. They have their own place to be, their position. There's a reason for them to be within the structure, so you can still admire them. It is a decorative style of creating arrangement or vegetative, but structure means you have built something for all those flowers to rest on and build through. Perhaps looking at these examples will give you more of an idea. And then we have texture, the textured style, mainly used for decorative floristry. It is wonderful when you put together leaves, blossoms, other things, so that the surface becomes a carpet with hardly any pattern or anything else, but lots of beautiful, beautiful texture. It can work with any types of forms. For example, the first thing, the figurine you saw, or as garlands, or on a sphere, or in a tray. But textured structures are always very, very beautiful, particularly if you have made contrasts of the textures as well to make them far more interesting. They are quite stable. The feeling, they don't have lots and lots of movement and rhythm. They are quite a stable thing unless you make a real point of adding the textures into an line arrangement in some way to make them more interesting. They are always, though, very beautiful. And then we have designed structures. These are edifices. These are constructions made of sticks and branches and floral bundles, any other manner of materials, and they're all tied together or wired or stuck or wound to create the structure. The design in the plant employed for it to become the structure is the center of the attention, and so any flowers that are used aren't really the emphasis. It is the form, the rhythm, the shape of the structure itself that dominates. And of course, you don't really need to use any flowers or foliage at all. If you found some beautiful plant material that is so attractive, perhaps in the colour like dogwood or texture, that when you create your structure, it is incredibly beautiful, you can make an arrangement just with those things like this one is. Plenty to think about. It's quite a wild idea if you've been doing conventional designs, but think about building structures out of interesting materials and they become the arrangement in their own right. What on earth does object like mean, you might be asking? Think about object like as being a work of art in its own right that just happens to be using floral material. It is very artistic. It can include collages and sculpture. They are purely artistic. They are very imaginative. They make people think. They make people react to them about what on earth is going on here. And if you think of them as works of art, floral art, they are very much assessed as you would in the art world. Object-like elements have no clear rules, just like art has no clear rules, and they are spontaneous, they're impulsive, they're unbelievably creative, they are free expressions of the artist reacting in some way to plant material. This is flowers at its most creative, as the designer has gone outside, thrown out all of the rules and just created something to make a statement. A layered structure is much easier to understand and much easier to do, because for this, plants and plant elements are layered on top of each other or next to each other or beside one another. The possibilities are so numerous because you can lay them, you can wire them, you can thread them, you can skewer them, and you are going to get all these wonderful versatile versions that are going to make your layered structure quite interesting. You can skewer leaves vertically. You can stack bark horizontally. You can hang pieces of succulents so they're coming down from a chandelier. You can stack ice. All of these things are layering, and they are exciting possibilities, particularly if you are doing a decorative or a formal linear style design. And really it is just a case of threading or bundling. Here you can see pine needles have been bundled as well to create this layered structure. This example is called a stacked structure. It is a translation from German, and I feel as if it's a very awkward translation because what it means is nothing to do with stacking, in my opinion. It's to do with only using a very limited or even just a single type of flower or stem and using all parts of it. It comes from Ikebana in Japan, where the designers of Ikebana are, as part of one of their exercises, have to take a flower stem, in this case a lily, and use all parts of it to create an arrangement. Here it is done with a carnation. The designer Sally C, who has done these particular ones, specializes in taking all parts of one particular type of plant material and using it in an incredibly creative way, but only using one type of plant material. So would I call it stacking? I don't think I would call it stacking, but it just doesn't have another name. So don't think of it as layering, stacking things one on top of the other. Think of it as looking at one particular type of plant material and exploring all the different ways all of its parts can be used to create a very, very creative structure. And number 30 is a nice easy one. It's been around since the 80s and it's all about winding plant material around something. You can wind wire, wool, leather, ribbons, metal, all sorts of things around something else, and these structures are still incredibly popular. They are wonderful ways of covering up elements that you don't want to be seen. They also create fabulous textures. If you use very, very good contrasts with them all, it is a really good technique. So I think it's going to be around for a long time, and you are just winding. Why is it different from a winding line arrangement? Because a winding line arrangement winds the entire arrangement around in a circular pattern. This isn't. This is a small, tight winding of one part, one element of the design. So this is a structural thing where you are winding around a structure rather than it is the structure. And have you ever done an interwoven style? They're incredibly versatile, they're incredibly interesting, and they look good because the person who is looking at it wants to look closer to go, where does that stem disappear to as it goes over or under or around something? Interwoven structure means some part of it is weaving in and out of some other part of it. You can weave or intertwine the entire arrangement, or you can just simply do a little part of it. You can use dried plant material, you can use mosses and tubes if you want to just add flowers in certain parts of it. And it also is very, very decorative. You can use this style for a decorative design that is fabulous for the center of a table. It's very, very cool to do because you can use beautiful long stems such as for the using a calla or climbers or vines, and create all these beautiful pieces that intertwine. Interwoven structures, you have to give them a go. They really are good fun. finally, we have bundled structures. The shortest section, because what do? You bundle things. Any dried plant material, any plant material at all really, bundle it up, put it together, you have a bundled structure. What else is there to say? So there it is, 32 styles, essential to keep variety in your flower arranging for this year.